Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 9 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. In the first topic from the Analyst section, we'll be discussing in depth about the provisions, the challenges and the recent Supreme Court verdict on the Prevention of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012. Then in the second topic, we will study about the emerging concept of unplanned urbanization, the challenges associated with it, and how we can tackle these challenges by enabling transit-oriented development. Then we'll be taking up 7 articles from your simplified section, where we'll try to simplify the news for you as well as provide value enhancement. So stay tuned. In a landmark judgment, the Supreme Court held that even watching child sexual abuse material or CSAM will also be considered as an offence under the Prevention of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012. The act, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of government policies and interventions. Well, as an article written by Ratna Kiruba in a journal called as Think Global Health titled Silent Suffering, she shares her ordeal of facing exploitation, sexual exploitation as a child at a tender age of 13 years old by a close relative, and the persistent trauma which she still faces even till today because of the mishappening. This very same issue of child exploitation or sexual exploitation at a very young age forms or drives the antagonist of the recently released web series Sector 36 to commit the heinous crimes, the description of which can actually shake the conscience of law-abiding people like me and you. Disturbing a start to the Analyst today? Yes, of course. But this is also the dark reality of the society of which me and you are integral part of. And I cannot expect you all to become a police officer in the future and curb down such issues unless and until you are very well aware about such heinous issues. So let's try to understand this silent suffering or the children's sexual abuse, the status of it, the extent of it by using the National Crime Record Bureau data from 2022 to 2023. According to which there was a 96% surge between 2016 to 22 in the cases of sexual violence against the children. Where the reported cases, keep this in mind, we are not even taking into the consideration the cases which did not reach till police station. So the reported cases of child rape and penetrative assault stood at 38,911 in the year of 2022 itself. And out of all the rape cases, 43% of the victims were actually minor or below 18 years old. Keep this in mind that 1.3% of the victims were actually below 6 years, a small child. 20% of them were below 16 years and 22% were between 16 to 18 years. Also, if we look at the data which has been released by the UNICEF, it tells us that 1 in the 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys is a victim of child sexual abuse. 20% of adult women and 5 to 10% of adult men actually recall a child sexual assault or abusive incident. 28% of the youth ages between 14 to 17 had actually been sexually assaulted throughout their lifetime, and 3 out of 4 such adolescents who have been sexually assaulted were actually victimized by someone who they knew, most of the time the family members. Now, what is the impact of such childhood sexual abuse? Well, such sexual abuse faced by a child has a long shelf life. And it actually impacts not only physically but the mental well-being of an individual, leading to a phenomena called as biological embedding. Biological embedding is basically the kind of circuiting of the brain nerves in such a way that it actually decides your response to any stress situation. And many of the time, such victims of child sexual abuse, their response to any kind of stress is either violence or aggression, thus leading to a very talked about phenomena today, that is post-trauma stress disorder, leading to their disassociation with society, their self-imposed social exclusion, because of their low self-esteem which they perceive. Ultimately, such issues which they are facing on mental level, it also starts reflecting on physical level as well, such as having sexual dysfunction or fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia is basically a pain syndrome where an individual feels that he is consistently in fatigue. Or promiscuity. Promiscuity is establishing sexual intercourse with many people just to establish your self-worth to yourself. Also, it actually hinders the educational attainment of such victim. So if there is less educational attainment, it will actually lead to less skill accumulation. Less skill accumulation will actually lead to low employment opportunities. That will eventually drive a person to poverty. And poverty is basically the mother of the various kind of crimes, assaults, thefts which take place, as we were discussing in the case of the web series Sector 36. Thus, the government of India actually took an adequate step by creating the Prevention of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012 to actually safeguard the demographic dividend of the country. And it was also the consequence of India signing and ratifying the UN Convention on Rights of Child 1992. So now let's try to understand the provisions of this POCSO Act of 2012. According to this act, who is a child? The child is basically any individual who is below 18 years of age. And keep this in mind that the act actually emphasizes on gender neutrality. So it basically recognizes both girls and boys who can become the victim of the childhood sexual abuse, as we saw here as well, right? The data released by UNICEF. Now, who can report the cases under this particular act? If I am a victim, I can go to the police. If there is any individual to whom I have shared this ordeal, that person can venture as well. And at the same time, any institution can also venture on the behalf of the child who is the victim. What is the penalty? So with the recent amendments in 2019, the death penalty has been accorded for committing any kind of sexual crimes against the innocent child. And keep this in mind that there is also a provision for speedy justice by the creation of fast-track special courts. Also, the POCSO rules 2020, which were enacted by the Ministry of Home Affairs, it actually led to the interim compensation which can be provided to these victims by these order of these fast-track special courts. Compensation for what? Compensation for providing them immediate relief or rehabilitation. And such relief and rehabilitation can actually be provided just after filing of the first information report or FIR. Also, the district child protection units which are created under the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015, they can also provide for compensation to these children, right, to avail them any kind of travel, clothes, food, or their enrollment in education if these DCPUs are directed by the Child Welfare Commission. Keep this in mind that there is a kind of a proportional penalty if you have committed any crime against the child, such as, for example, if the age of the victim is actually younger, that will actually lead to more heinous offense which has been alleged against you. If the age of the accused is older, then again more heinous the offense alleged, right? So there is a proportional penalty. At the same time, section 29 of the POCSO, it says that when a person is prosecuted for committing an offense of sexual assault against any minor, the special court who is trying the case, it shall presume the accused to be guilty. So in the normal case of natural justice, it is basically that you are innocent until proven guilty. But if you have committed obviously such a heinous crime, you are accused to be guilty unless proven otherwise. Keep this in mind as per the section 29 of the POCSO Act 2012. However, despite such stringent provisions, there exist persisting issues with the Act. First is obviously the high pendency of the cases and the low conviction rate. So just look at the data which has been provided here to you by the sourcing it from the law ministry. It states the number of cases which are pending in these fast track court. Up to 2.4 lakh rape cases which has been booked under the provision of POCSO, they are pending in 764 special fast track court as of January 2023. Even the conviction rate is actually as low as 20%. And what is the reason for this high pendency and low conviction rate? So first is obviously the procedural lapses in the investigation by police itself, right? So there are several aspects. We will discuss them one by one. First is that the act says that, let's say if there is a female victim, so such female victim shall be inspected by an investigating officer who has to be woman. However, if you look at our police force, the women forms only 10% of this police force. So now that can lead to two circumstances. One is that if there is a male inspector who is actually inspecting the female victim, so the female victim will find herself very much uncomfortable to share her experience, share her ordeal. Second is that such inspection will not take place at all because of the social taboos which exist. Then many of the times these policies, even though there is a directive by the Supreme Court in the Mohammed Shafi case of 2018, where Supreme Court directed that any such investigating officer shall take photograph and video record the crime scene. However, in many of the cases, this is actually not done by the police. Why? Because of the forming of the back channels. The back channels between the policeman and the culprit. Then the POCSO Act directs that such investigation has to be directed within 1 month of registration of FIR. But in more than 90% of the cases, the investigation keeps on going. One reason for such prolonged investigation is that there exists no specific condition to prove the recent intercourse which has taken place. So the Act does not define any such specific provision. Even within the limits of science, it actually is quite difficult to do that. Also, when we are talking about the rural hinterlands. The third is the issue with the age determination. So because the Act has not laid down any specific guidelines that how the age of the victim will be determined, many of the time the investigating officers, they actually rely on the birth date which has been accorded in the school certificate. So obviously what happens that many of the times our parents, they just quote our age to be low, just to make sure that we get into some government services. Because of that, many of the time it can actually happen that a person has actually crossed the age of 18 and thus he can form a legal sexual intercourse. But because his age was actually said to be low, so in that case that person can be trialed again under the POCSO. That is why many court has actually been asking to increase the age of consent under the POCSO. Just look at, for example, here the Bombay High Court, which said that the age of consent under the POCSO perhaps is highest globally, and thus India should take note of the global scenario and increase the age of consent. However, in the recent directive by the Law Commission stated otherwise. It said that the such age of consent, it shall neither be increased nor be decreased as directive by the various high courts. So there is an ongoing tussle related to the legal age as well. In this aspect, what has been the prominence of the recent verdict of the Supreme Court, where it has actually expanded the scope of the Section 15 of the Act. Section 15 of the Act basically deals with the provisions of child pornography. So the POCSO Act was amended to introduce 3 connected offences under the Section 15 clause 1, 2 and 3. And it increased basically the grades of punishment, right? So for example, let's say you are a person who is storing or possessing any kind of pornographic material in any form involving a child, and you fail to either delete or destroy such material or to report it to the designated authority, then you will be sent to jail for a provision of 3 years. Now, any person who store or possess such pornographic material involving a child and you are transmitting or propagating or distributing it in any manner, then you will be sent to jail for 4 years. Or if you are storing or possessing such pornographic material in any form involving a child for any commercial purposes or exploitation of the child, then you will be held for at least 5 years. Just look at the increasing number of such child pornography cases under the Section 15 in the recent year as per the NCRB report. More than 703 victims in the year of 2022. Keep this in mind that these are the reported numbers, right? So, what the Supreme Court has said in a landmark judgment. The Supreme Court on Monday held that viewing, even in private, downloading, storing, possessing, distributing or displaying any kind of pornographic act which involves a children will attract the criminal liability under the POCSO Act as well as Information Technology Act. Right? Keep this in mind that this judgment has been passed on the appeal which was actually filed by an NGO, a children NGO whose name is Just Right for Children Alliance, right? So because recently a NGO question has been asked in your UPSC mains paper. So if in the future it is going to ask about the NGOs related to children working on the ground level, so you can quote this one as well, right? Now, the Supreme Court also urged the Parliament to seriously consider amending the POCSO Act to substitute the term child pornography with the child exploitative and abuse material, right? So, what is the prominence of this act is, the importance of this act, that imagine that you get a link from your friend, and when you just click on that link, you realize that this link or the video, it actually contains child pornography. So, you being an honest person, a good person, you actually close the link. Now, will you be held liable under this recent verdict of Supreme Court? The answer is yes. Because even though you have not watched the link, you are in the possession of that link, right? And you have not deleted it or reported it to the designated authority. So it can be still circulated, right? So now the Supreme Court has come in a very strong ground to curb this issue of child pornography and sexual abuse against the children, right? The Supreme Court has also directed the central government to promulgate an ordinance in the meantime to bring about the suggested amendment under the powers of Article 123 of the President. So keep this verdict in your mind. Try to attempt this particular mains question. Also, you can provide some innovative measures which you guys will take as a future officer to curb down this issue. So comment that down as well. We move forward to the next news, where the article showcases the utility of transit-oriented development (TOD) system to tackle the challenges of unplanned urbanization. The unplanned urbanization, which forms an important component of your GS1 paper under the theme of urbanization and associated challenges. Well, urbanization is a very emerging concept in our Indian society, a very characteristic phenomenon. For example, if we look at the World Cities Report 2022, it states that how 40% of India's population will be living in the cities by the year of 2030. Now, what are the factors which are actually propelling this urbanization in our country? Obviously, there exists a mixture of both the push as well as the pull factors. First of all, there exist certain historic reasons, such as, for example, colonization. The colonization by the British, which eventually led to the development of port cities. Port cities such as, for example, Bombay, Madras, Calcutta, etc., where the concentration of the trade activities actually provided for economic opportunities, the employment opportunities, and that actually attracted millions of Indians from the rural hinterlands. Obviously, from your history classes, you guys can recall the concept of deindustrialization and disguised unemployment which existed in rural areas during the British rule. Then the second phase of urbanization was actually marked by the Green Revolution of 1970s, which was actually marked by the agriculture production, agriculture surplus, leading to the various agro-based industries and the development of Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. Then came the third phase, especially after the LPG reforms, the liberalization, privatization and globalization reforms of 1991, which led to the emergence of tech cities such as, for example, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Pune, etc. Now, these cities were actually increasing population in these cities was marked by various kind of push factors. The push factors which actually pushed the villagers outside their villages. The first reason being the existence of poor health and education infrastructure in the villages. So if we refer to the Ministry of Education report of 2023, it states that how the literacy rate in rural areas is 73% in comparison to 87% in the urban areas. So obviously, if I will look at my children and I want my children to have the world-class education to actually prosper in the future, I will send my children to the big cities, in the big colleges, in the big coaching institutions, right? That is the idea. The second is the lack of employment opportunities which exist in the rural area. So if we refer to the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, it states that how the unemployment rate in rural areas is around 9.3% as per June 2024. Also, even if the employment exists, these rural areas are actually marked by the lower wages. So, for example, if we look at the average daily wage rate for agriculture occupation in the rural India, as per the Ministry of Statistics, just look at the daily wage rate for the people in the rural areas, which actually range from 300 to 500 rupees majorly, and that is even lesser for women, right? So let's say if I am living in a village and there is no health or education infrastructure, lack of employment opportunities, and even if I'm working or striving really hard, I'm getting lower wages, obviously that will lead to the poor living standards. Then it will eventually lead to what? The vicious cycle of poverty. So if I have less resources, obviously that means I have less accumulation of skill. That less accumulation of skill will actually transpire to less employment opportunities. So basically, if I am a poor person, that will lead to less skill or facility for my children as well. So even they will be born equally poor, creating a vicious cycle of poverty. At the same time, there are certain pull factors which are actually attracting the villagers to the urban areas. Obviously, first is the employment opportunities and higher wages. So if we refer to the Niti Aayog states that how 70% of India's GDP by the year of 2030 will come from these cities. The cities which are obviously providing better working condition and high standard of living. They are providing to these people who are migrating the better infrastructure, the number of schools, hospitals, right? Next is that there exists a cosmopolitan culture in these cities, where the people, they have got higher degree of freedom and even higher decision making power. Freedom from what? Freedom from the rigidities such as, for example, caste, religion, language, various kind of patriarchal barriers which exist, right? Or for example, various kind of social taboos. So let's say, for example, you want to become an influencer on social media and you are coming from a small rural hinterland village where there exists still the social taboo of women that they should keep a veil. How you will actually explore or actually promote your fashion things there in the rural areas? Obviously, it's not a possibility. Then there is the increasing globalization and the butterfly effect which it has caused. We'll try to understand this by taking an example. Let's say you are there and you are preparing along with your 4 friends, right? Now these 4 friends or 4 UPSC aspirants are coming from the same kind of economic background as you, right? So you all go to a medium range library. You all does not own any kind of iPhone. You all have minimum resources to just enroll in one coaching or one course. The idea is that will you feel poor among these people? No, absolutely not. But the moment when you will make a new friend who has access to the best library in the area, who has got all the technological gadgets, who can enroll in 100 courses offered by the coachings. Now, in front of him, will you feel poor? Absolutely. And this is the relative deprivation, the relative poverty. Now, the people who are living in the villages, they were obviously not exposed to the kind of high standard of living which existed in the mega cities such as, for example, New York of USA or Moscow of Russia. But now, because of social media, it created a phenomena called as global villages, right? And these global villages, now you are exposed to the life standards of these people living there, and thus you want to live the very same kind of life, and thus that lead to high level of migration. Understanding this social dynamics would have actually helped you to answer this CSC Mains 2024 questions very adequately. A very interesting question on globalization, just try to attempt it. Moving forward, what all these push and pull factors has led to, it has led to the swelling of urban population. Just look at the increasing urban population from the year of 1990 onwards. Now, obviously, if this population is increasing, this unchecked growth has actually led to unplanned urbanization as well. If we refer to the Niti Aayog report, it states that 65% of the statutory towns in our country, they does not have any master plan. So basically they do not have any plan or base plan on which they are being created, like the Indus Valley civilization of 4500 years ago. They are just expanding without any plans at all. What are these statutory towns? Statutory towns are basically the towns which has got their municipality or notified town area committee. And if we look at the data provided by census 2011, there exist more than 4000 plus such statutory towns. So 65% of that means that around 2400 statutory towns in our country, they do not have any plans at all. So obviously that will lead to the issue of ghettoization, the issue of creation of the slums. The irony is that in the city of Bombay, there exists the biggest slum of the Asia and also the rich fortress of the richest man of Asia as well, sometimes called as Antilla. Idea is 42% of this Mumbai's population is actually living in the slums according to the census 2011, and 57% of the families, they live in one-room families, thus creating the demand for a huge level of infrastructure. The second issue is the traffic bottlenecks which it causes and the congestion which it takes place. So if we look at the report, the Global Cities Report of 2019, 4 of the top 10 congested cities exist in our country, with Bangalore ranking as 1, the city which is termed as the city which never moves. There is Bombay, there is Pune, there is Delhi as well. If you look at the data provided here, it states that in Bangalore, the commuters, they waste 10 days and 3 hours on road every year. So if you are living in Bangalore for 30 years, congratulations, you have spent 1 year of your life by just seeing the traffic lights. Now what happens that also there exists a low level penetration of the public transport. So now if there is congestion in the public transport as well, right? Now you guys can see the status of the metros in our country. Now, to avoid all of this, the high income individuals, what they do, they just buy their private cars for their own convenience. And their convenience actually leads to the high level of vehicular pollution. Just look at the increasing number of vehicles in Delhi in the last 2 decades. And just look at the share of the transport in the emission of the pollution of particulate matter 2.5, that is around 41%. That actually equals the total number of pollution released by industry, power as well as residential. Then obviously such unplanned urbanization, it leads to concretization, right? Because obviously the people kept on moving and now we have to create these cities, right? To make their stays here in the cities. And for that a large scale concretization took place, deforestation took place, leading to the issue of urban heat island. Because this building materials, for example, concrete and asphalt, it do what? It absorbs and traps heat, which leads to high temperature, which actually in this particular region, which actually affects the health, increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease, heat stroke, sunstroke, dehydration, etc. Also, as highlighted by the today's article, there exists a huge social cost as well. Because this longer work commutes, congestion, pollution arising from the greater private vehicular use, all of that actually leads to hampers the access to jobs and labor markets productivity and livability as well. For example, if we take the case of Bangalore, which is among the world's most traffic congested cities, the social cost is estimated to be around 38,000 crore annually, that is around 5% of the city's GDP. So the today's article provides a solution, and that is transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented development is where we integrate the land use along with the sustainable model of transport. See, we will create an example which you guys can make in your copies as well, right? What we can do? Let's say this is an industrial area, right? Where there are a lot of factories providing a lot of employment opportunities. Now there are certain people who stays at 1 kilometer who are working in these industrial areas. So for these people, can we actually create walking ramps? Now there are certain people who are living around 2 kilometers away from this industrial area. So for these people, can we create a cycling channel, especially for these people? Then there are certain people who might be living 20 kilometers away, far away from this congestion of the cities, maybe in another city. So for these people, we can create adequate amount of public transport system, and this is the whole idea of transit-oriented development. What the government is doing now? So the government is actually trying to, increase the public expenditure with a projected expenditure of 3 trillion rupees between 2022 to 27 to spend on these approved metro rail projects, right, which will eventually generate thousands of jobs and deliver the economic return between 5 to 7 times greater than the initial outlay. So what government has done? Government has launched the National Transit Oriented Development Policy as well as Metro Rail Policy in 2017. And 27 Indian cities are building various kind of metro rail systems under that. What will be the use of this transit oriented development system? So if we take the example of Hong Kong, what it did, it created 57% of the jobs within the 500 meter of a transit station. And that eventually led to mass scale employment, because the people could have just easily travel till their working places. Their commute hours actually reduced as well. So that led to their gross value addition per capita increasing by 50% between the 2 decades. The fuel consumption as well as the carbon dioxide emission declined by 10%. It actually enhanced the workforce productivity and participation as well as created local economic and real estate development. That is the model which we can also be planning for the city of Bangalore. So if you look at the Bangalore, there are major job clusters for manufacturing as well as service sector, such as, for example, there is Kormangla, Whitefield, Majestic is there, right? So what the government is doing, it is creating the metro lines along these job clusters itself. So the jobs can be created within the vicinity of this transit system. So even if a person is looking at Bellary Road, which is quite far away from the main city of Bangalore, that person can easily travel, come here, work and go back. So that will eventually reduce the whole issue which we were discussing, such as, for example, the urban heat island impact, the vehicular emission, the traffic bottlenecks, as well as the issue of slums, right? What are the way forward which can also be implemented in the case of Bangalore? What the article suggests that additional development rights shall be provided in this area. There shall be fees reduction as well as tax subsidies. There can be a deployment of private-public model to capture financing mechanisms, as well as there can be a creation of nodal agency for such transit-oriented development planning as well as implementation. So keep these suggestions in your mind and try to attempt this particular question. We move forward to the next news, where we are going to actually look on India's defense export as well as the humanitarian law aspect. A very interesting article which has come today. Before we dwell into that, let's first try to understand the increasing export especially in the defense sector by our country. So after the defense acquisition policy of 2020, on which we actually put impetus on the indigenous content, we can see that how there has been consistent increase in our defense exports, right? For example, it reached to around 16,954 crore rupees in the fiscal year of 24. Keep this in mind that when we are exporting, we are also exporting such defense or arms and ammunition products to Israel as well. The Israel which is currently in war with the state of Palestine, right? Keep this aspect in mind. At the same time, our import has reduced, but not that significantly. We still import a lot of arms and ammunition. So, for example, 45% from the Russia, 28% from the France, 11% from the US. Remember that Israel is our 4th largest defense partner when it comes to the aspect of import. Now let's try to understand what does the article suggest today. The article talks about that how the Supreme Court rejected the PIL, the public interest litigation, asking the central government to stop exporting defense equipment to Israel because it is allegedly committing war crimes in Gaza. One of the reasons why Supreme Court actually rejected the PIL, because the foreign policy is considered to be out of the ambit of the prospect of the Supreme Court. Now, does the court anywhere or any other countries has restricted their defense export to Israel? The answer is yes. Because if you look at the Netherlands court, it actually blocked the export of F-35 fighter jet to Israel. Also, there exists the European Union law. The Union law which actually prohibits the military equipment to a country if it is violating any kind of international humanitarian law. Also, if we talk about the United Kingdoms, there exists a law called as Export Control Act, under which actually they did not exported the arms and ammunition to Israel, considering that it is violating the international humanitarian law. Now, the article actually suggests that if we talk about India, there exists no equivalent of UK's Export Control Act or EU regulations in India, right? So we do not have any such law which is actually stopping us to export to Israel, right? Arms and ammunition to Israel, right? However, if we talk indirectly, there exist two provisions. One is the Section 3 Clause 5 of the FTA, that is Indian Foreign Trade Act of 1992, as well as Section 2 Clause 1 of the Weapons of Mass Destruction and Their Delivery Systems Act of 2005, which actually empowers the central government to regulate the export for various reasons. One of the reason is obviously India's national security. The second reason is that if we have to fulfill any international obligations under any bilateral, multilateral or any convention, right? However, remember that both of these acts, they do not include the assessment of the country's compliance with any kind of international humanitarian law obligations, right? So yes, let's say if there is a treaty and if we have to follow that, we can curb our exports with Israel. But at the same time, does any provision of these acts state that we need to assess whether Israel is compiling with international humanitarian law or not? No, there is no such provision, right? So that is why if there is no such provision, India, unlike UK and EU, we are not under any obligation to review the IHL compliance of the country to which we are exporting the defense goods. The article gives an argument that just like how the Supreme Court has done for other acts, for other measures, we can also include the international aspect and the Supreme Court can issue a guideline in this regard. The article is suggesting that. Just like how it did in the Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan, ultimately leading to the passing of Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act of 2013 at a workplace, right? So that was the idea. So the article is stating that judiciary can actually incorporate the international law to fill the vacuum which is created by the absence of the domestic law on the subject, right? What is the international law in this regard? So there exists a arms trade and treaty, right, which actually regulates the international trade in the conventional arms. There are two important articles to remember for you. First is Article 6. Article 6 actually bars the country from supplying conventional arm if the country, like let's say if I as a India know that these arms will be used for war crimes. Article 7 provides for assessment of whether export could lead to the such violations, right? Violations of international humanitarian law, right? So just look at the picture here. It is stating that, like, when I'm exporting, so I should actually assess that if the arms and ammunition which I am providing to Israel, whether that can be used for violation of human rights law, terrorism, organized crime, gender-based violence. If yes, then I should not do such transfer. Now the interesting aspect is that India is not a signatory to this arms and trade and treaty. So we don't have any obligation. But the article suggests that we still have to follow the international humanitarian law, which is actually guided by various Geneva Conventions, such as, for example, the common Article 1 of Geneva Convention, which is even binding on our country. And it obligates every state, including India, to respect and ensure respect for the international humanitarian law. Thus, the Nicaragua versus United States, the International Court of Justice (ICJ) actually held that this is a negative obligation on the state. You have to ensure respect for IHL. That is why the article today is suggesting that India should actually amend its domestic laws to strengthen its credibility, to follow the international humanitarian law compliance, and thus to not export defense goods to such countries, right? So keep this very interesting things in mind, keep the acts which we have discussed, and we move forward to the next news. In this particular section, we are going to discuss about the increasing cases of dengue and what is the reason, the issue which actually forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of issues related to the health sector. Let's first try to understand what is dengue. So dengue is basically a viral infection which is actually transmitted by the Aedes aegypti mosquito. First note this down, and also note that this same mosquito, Aedes aegypti, is actually responsible for spreading of chikungunya, Zika virus as well as yellow fever virus, right? Now this Aedes aegypti, it lives in urban habitats and it breeds mostly in the man-made containers. Keep this in mind that a peak biting period of this Aedes aegypti is early in the morning and in evening before dusk. Most of the dengue cases occur in the tropical areas of the world, such as, for example, Indian subcontinent, Southern Africa, China, etc. Why? Because the temperature is an essential component for the thriving of this Aedes aegypti. The symptoms include the fever, severe headache, muscle and joint pains. But sometimes it can also lead to internal bleeding, and if not managed properly, it can lead to death as well. So there is a fatality rate involved as well. Now, as per the Lancet report, there is a tenfold increase in these dengue cases. So let's first try to assess the spread of dengue. How many people have been infected this year? So if you look at the Lancet report, it states that how around 12 million people or 12 million cases has been occurred in this year itself by 2024, and 6,991 deaths has been reported, right, as per the WHO's global dengue surveillance. Keep this in mind that this is just double of the cases which were reported in the year of 2023, and this itself was a record. So now a new record has been made for increasing dengue cases, right? Also, the experts has this opinion that this 2024's record number is even an undercount. Why? Because there exist many countries, including our country, which do not report their data to this global surveillance network of World Health Organization, right? So what is the status of dengue in our country? So if we look at the National Vector-Borne Disease Control Program, right, it provides us the data till June 2024. So there is around reporting of 32,000 cases and 32 deaths. There is 50% rise in dengue cases which has been reported from the last year by the month of June itself. And also there is taking place geographical expansion. So if we look at the year of 2001, there were only 8 states and union territories which were actually reporting the case of dengue. But by the year of 2022, it has spread to all states and union territories. The question is, what is behind the surge in the dengue cases? What is the reason? The Lancet report actually puts the impetus on the triad of urbanization, climate change and the movement of people and goods. First, try to understand the concept of urbanization. So urbanization, or the people who are living in dense areas like very close to each other, that is basically the most fertile ground for the spread of any kind of virus. Obviously, just right now we read about the World Cities Report 2022, 40% of the population by the year of 2030 in these cities itself. Also, if you look at the population density of India, that is 488 per kilometer square, while the world average is 60 people per kilometer square. So obviously there is a fertile ground which is available. Now what is happening, that during the time of monsoon, right, there will take place accumulation or stagnation of water. And this stagnation of water is specifically because of the poor drainage infrastructure which exists. So because of this, there is a stagnation of water which is taking place. This is actually clean water by the monsoon. Just after that, what is happening, that because of climate change induced the extreme weather events which are taking place, right? So there is taking place incessant rain, and it is just followed after like a very heat period. So that is basically, there is a availability of water as well as a lot of amount of heat is actually available, and that provides the most fertile ground for the like the creation of the Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, right, which is basically the carrier of this dengue, right? Now what is happening, that the temperature is increasing because of the global warming, climate change. As per the IPCC report, the temperature has already risen by 1.2 degrees Celsius. So now what is happening, that because of such increase in temperature, obviously there is more cases for viral amplification as well as increasing chances of this virus survival as well. Now because of this increasing temperature, obviously the area or the geographical area has expanded as well. So now there is high temperature at higher altitudes as well. That is why in 2022, the UT of Ladakh, it reported its first case ever of dengue, right? At the same time, the months for this dengue spread has also increased up to 5.6 months by the year of 2022. So the months are increasing, geographical expansion is increasing. At the same time, the fertile conditions are increasing as well. And all of this is further actually put impetus by the movement of people and goods, thus because more increase of the carriers of these viruses and more increase of infection. So, what are the prevention strategy which can be adopted for dengue as per the explained article today? The first is obviously the World Health Organization's recommended vaccines, which are Dengvaxia, that was the first vaccine against the dengue, and as well as Q dengue. Then Wolbachia bacteria can actually be implemented, which actually hinders the growth of this Aedes aegypti mosquito, as it was actually used by Indonesia. We can do that as well. Then we can actually use this surveillance system to actually curb down the spread of virus under your National Vector-Borne Disease Control Program. Then genome sequencing of this dengue shall be done so that we further understand it and develop our indigenous vaccine as well, which India is actually trying. Also, to create awareness, the National Dengue Day is celebrated on May 16 to actually make people aware about the various preventive measures, just for example, applying mosquito repellent, clean clogged drain, close windows and door, using of mosquito nets, and please wear long bright clothing. Do not wear such dark clothes as well. Right? Keep this in mind. We move forward to the next news. This interesting article actually talks about the certain loopholes which exist with the recently enacted Bharati Nagrik Nyaya Samhita, which forms an important component of your government policies and interventions as well. Right? So let's first try to understand the three new acts which has been enacted by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So the Indian Penal Code has been replaced by the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita. The CRPC or the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973 has been replaced by Bharati Nagrik Suraksha Samhita 2023, and the Indian Evidence Act has been replaced by the Bharatiya Sakshya Act of 2023. Now, the article today states that the section 107 of this Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Samhita, it actually provides or deals with the properties which are the proceeds of crime. And this section 107 of BNSS, it actually provides unbridled power to the courts to attach any property on request of police during the investigation, right? As well as to forfeit the proceeds of such property to the government, right? So keep this section 107 of BNSS in your mind. Now, what are the changes from the previous law which has been made, right? So before this, there was the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. And it stated that if, let's say, you have done any crime, right, and you have fled the country, right, let's say you are Vijay Mallya. Now there is some property related to yours. Now I will come as an officer and I can register your property as a proceed of crime, and I can do that by recording the reasons in the writing. No such writing provision is actually prescribed in your BNSS. So that is the first change. The second is that the section 173 of the CRPC, it actually provided for attachment of property only after forwarding the report to magistrate. However, now under the BNSS, the attachment of property can be done during the investigation itself, as we read, right? So now any officer can just suggest the court that please attach this property is of the crime during the investigation. The court will say that yes, absolutely you are right, it can do so as well, right? Now, the PMLA, it provides that the property which is involved in such money laundering can be disposed by the adjudicating authority only by the conclusion of the trial of the offence. However, as you guys can see, it is silent about the stage of disposal of such property. It is saying that we can do that during the investigation itself. Then the PMLA says that the distribution of such proceed of crime to the person who are affected by such crime can be done. But if in case there is no such claimant, right, let's say the Vijay Mallya's property is being disposed and I say that, oh, I was actually affected by Vijay Mallya, so I will get some share. But if there is no such claimant, then what will happen? Then the surplus, such proceeds of crime will be forfeited to the government. Now what this is there any kind of directive which has been provided by the Supreme Court to actually overrule all of this? That is yes. That was in the Sundar Bhai Ambalal Desai versus State of Gujarat, where it said that there is a jurisdiction of court to record evidence promptly to avoid the tampering of such evidences. Right? So just during the investigation process, if I as an officer tell the court that please forfeit this property to the government, there shall be an evidence and the same time there shall be a recording. However, this provision do not exist in the BNSS, right? So the section 107 of the BNSS, it requires the court to issue a show cause notice, right? Which is returnable within 14 days of why an order of attachment of property, that is procedure of crime, shall not be made, right? So the court did what? It issued a show cause notice to the Vijay Mallya, and Vijay Mallya has 14 days of time within which he should say that please leave this property, and he should give the reasons for that. Now let's say that if the person concerned does not represent this case, then obviously the court will proceed to pass the ex parte order, right? So that will actually basically direct the district magistrate to distribute the property within 60 days of the court order. Keep this in mind that there exist no guidelines for the district magistrate to identify the claimants to do the needful. It is just saying that district magistrate, you give the property to the people who are the part of this issue, right? If there is no claimant, then what district magistrate shall do? There exists no provision for that. Obviously, in most of the cases, the property will actually be forfeited to the government. If there are small claimants like me, we will not get anything in return. Thus, the article today, it actually suggests that there shall be implementation or keeping in mind the guidelines of Article 300A of the Constitution, which actually says that no person shall be deprived of his property save the authority of the law. Keep this in mind, that right to property was earlier used to be a fundamental right. Can you guys please comment that by which amendment it was actually removed as a fundamental right and now it is a constitutional as well as legal right which is provided to the people. Keep this in mind that it also has been given a status of basic human right, and there is a settled principle that law means validly enacted law which is just, fair and reasonable. So the article is basically saying it has identified the loophole which prevails in section 107 of BNSS and it is suggesting for the amendment of the same. So keep these provisions in your mind and we move forward to the next news. In this particular section, we will try to understand that why South America is burning. Because South America is actually facing rampaging wildfires in their forest, an issue which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of environment conservation and degradation. Let's first try to understand and assess how bad is the situation. Well, the wildfire is actually ravaging the Amazon rainforest in the region of Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, etc. And if we look at the satellite data which has been provided by INP, which is basically the Space Research Agency of Brazil, there it has actually identified more than 3 lakh plus fire hotspots in all the 13 countries of South America, which actually surpasses the previous record set in the year of 2007. The currently burning fire is in the region from various states of South America. It shows that the fires have burned more than 11 million hectares of land in this year itself, which is roughly twice the size of the state of Uttarakhand in our country. 3 of the 6 vast ecosystems of Amazon, which are basically Cerrado. Cerrado, remember, it is the world's most biodiverse savanna. So it is a very important fact for your prelims as well. The Pantanal wetlands and Amazon, all of them have been severely affected and after the Brazil, Bolivia has witnessed the highest number of fire this month. And because of this wildfire, what has taken place? The toxic clouds, which spans 10 million square kilometer, an area which is actually larger than the entire United States itself. What are the issues? Why this, the region of South America is burning? First is obviously the global warming. Right? So because of the increasing temperatures, the trees has been completely devoid of moisture and they have become completely dry, thus acting as a idle fuel, right? So for example, the wind, it supplies the fire with additional oxygen. It also causes the embers to move across the landscape. The low rainfall, high temperature and low humidity, it dry out the vegetation, causing it to ignite and burn faster. During the rainy season, the humidity is high and in order to ignite the first has to burn the moisture of a fuel. So obviously that will take more time, but the rainfall is not taking place because of the extreme weather events, and that has been further exacerbated because of the El Nino conditions as well, right? So now you guys will be like, wait a minute, the El Nino condition actually leads to low rainfall in the Indian region, but obviously there exists a lot of moisture. Right? Moisture in which particular region? In the region of the west coast of your central equatorial Pacific. So that will obviously lead to the rainfall on the west coast of South America, but not on the eastern side. But because the time the rain bearing winds reach to that particular region, they become dry. So does not taking place that much of rain because there is existing a lot of drought condition in this region, further exacerbating the issue of wildfire. Also, there are anthropogenic causes such as, for example, high level of deforestation which has taken place, right? So remember these issues, specifically remember this El Nino condition which is responsible for it, and we move forward to the next news, where the news actually talks about the Ayushman Bharat scheme and how Odisha is becoming the new state to join this Ayushman Bharat health coverage scheme. The scheme which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of government policies and interventions. Let's first try to understand what is Ayushman Bharat. Ayushman Bharat is the world's largest health insurance scheme as it aims to provide comprehensive health coverage, both secondary and tertiary healthcare services, to up to 5 lakh rupees per family per year to around 50 crore people. Keep this in mind that it is basically a centrally sponsored scheme, which basically means that the funds are shared in the ratio of 60 to 40 between the center and state, unless until they are hilly states or the northeast states where the fund sharing is around 90 to 10 ratio. The nodal agency for the implementation of this Ayushman Bharat or Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana is your National Health Authority, which is basically a society which has been registered under the Societies Act of 1860. It also contains, remember that under this Ayushman Bharat, both public and private hospitals has been included, and it provides the insurance coverage for both the expenditure of pre as well as post hospitalization. Now, what is the information which is provided by the today's news article? Let's have a quick overlook at that. The news is that Odisha is all set to join the Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, and as we have discussed, it aims to provide health cover of rupees 5 lakh per family per year, and as we have discussed, for both secondary and tertiary care of hospitalization. Keep this in mind that Odisha is simultaneously running its own health scheme called as Biju Swasth Kalyan Yojana, and now that scheme will run along with this central scheme, right? So see, as we have discussed that it is a centrally sponsored scheme where the financial burden is shared between the center and state. Now the Odisha has its own health scheme. So along with it, it will also provide the facilities of Ayushman Bharat Yojana. On similar lines, 18 states have already converged their state-specific schemes with the Ayushman Bharat. At the same time, the states such as, for example, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Uttarakhand and Nagaland, they are running their state employee schemes as well in convergence with the Ayushman Bharat hospitals as well as IT platforms. Now, there are certain important key data provided which you guys can note down. First is that 49% of the Ayushman cards are actually issued to the women, and out of 7.79 crore hospital admissions in this impaneled list of hospitals under the Ayushman Bharat, 3.61 crore are actually utilized by the women. Also, if we talk about the public-private utilization, then 57% is actually under the public healthcare system, 43% are the private hospitals, and the specialized utilities which are being provided under the Ayushman Bharat, it includes cancer treatment, nephrology, cardiology, general medicines as well as gastrology as well. So keep this data in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where the news actually highlights that how the Central Pollution for Control Board has actually admitted in the National Green Tribunal that half of all posts in the CPCBs at various levels are actually vacant. The CPCB, which forms an integral component of a prelims paper under the theme of statutory bodies, is basically a statutory body which was created under the Water Act 1974 or the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. It also has powers to monitor the air pollution under the Air Act of 1981. And it also provides field information and technical services to Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. Keep this in mind that CPCB plays an integral role in developing the standards for the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, water quality standards, standards for emission of pollutants by various industries as well as for disposal and treatment of biomedical waste by the industries. Now, obviously, the functioning of CPCB has come into compromise, the reason being the high-scale vacancy which exists. Just look at the states, for example, Sikkim, which has 100% vacancies. In the states of Jharkhand and Andhra Pradesh, the vacancy is more than 70%, and then in several states, the vacancy is more than 60%. So, obviously, that acts as a hinder to the functioning of the CPCB. Keep this in your mind. Now, as we have discussed that this CPCB has actually admitted where? In the front of National Green Tribunal. The National Green Tribunal is also a statutory body created under the NGT Act of 2010. So on the basis of this simple discussion, just try to solve this particular question which appeared in the year of 2018. Let's see how many of you get it right, and we move forward to the last news of the day, where we are actually going to discuss about a traditional theatre form called as Kudiyattam or Kutiyattam. Kudiyattam is basically the oldest traditional theatre form which exists in Kerala, and keep this in mind, it is based upon the principles of a Sanskrit theatre. Now these plays actually takes place in a theatre arena which is termed as Kuttampalams. The male performers are called as Chakyars and the female performers are called as Nangiyars. So remember these terms. Now also, considering its heritage, the Kudiyattam has been included in the Intangible Heritage List by the UNESCO. Now today's news highlight the Choliyattam, which is basically a collective of the young Kudiyattam artists in Kerala, which was actually launched during the time of pandemic, and it has now evolved into a platform where artists from various different styles come together to actually preserve the art form and also to impart the knowledge to the future generation in various schools in various states as well. Right? Now, what are these different styles which are associated with Kudiyattam? So, remember these terms specifically for your prelims examination. The various styles of Kudiyattam are Kalamdalam, Painkulam, as well as Amanur style, and your Mani Gurukulam style as well. All of these associated with Kudiyattam. Now, there exists no such big difference in these styles when it comes to costume, but there are slight changes in the sign language as well as deviations in the acting styles in the various forms of Kudiyattam. Now earlier this art form was specifically confined to the temples of the Kerala, right, of the Travancore dynasty, the ruling dynasty of that time. However, as the part of the outreach program with such collectives such as, for example, Choliyattam, now these artists from various different social backgrounds have come together to strive for a common cause, and that is a spread of these traditional theatre forms to various states across our country. So with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.